You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
All right, here to talk politics, I'm joined by Robert Coon of Impact Management Group, Dr. J. Barth, Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Hendrix College, Democrat, Republican. Thank you guys for being here.
Thanks, Robbie.
All right. First of all, let's get some disclaimers out of the way. So you don't have any disclaimers, I don't think. Robert, your firm has worked for Congressman Steve Womack. We're going to talk about the CD3 race. Right. You guys did some work for Justice Rhonda Wood. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court race that's out there. I don't think you're going to give away any company secrets. So let's begin with CD3. Jay, I'll get your take first. It was a low voter turnout statewide, particularly in CD3. That race was a lot closer than I think people expected.
Yeah, it kind of came out of nowhere, and the early vote in particular was a really close race. Womack only, I think, about 1,400 vote lead over Representative Penzo. Penzo did not spend a lot of money in that race. Womack was just very vulnerable as a result of some of his mainstream actions. I think he's become not exactly an anti-Trumper, but he's become enough of an advocate for kind of keeping the Republican Party within the lines, and it has made him very vulnerable. I think he was really one Truth Social post away from being really, really vulnerable, but that didn't happen. But folks could have come after him and probably taken him out, I think.
Yeah, I'll get Robert's take on that. But Congressman Womack earlier in the show here tells me, when I asked him about that, about the performance, he basically said, I've taken some votes that have not always been popular, but they're the right votes. So.
Right, and I think I wouldn't say anti-Trumper. I would say that Congressman Womack's more of a statesman, and that's kind of how he approaches the job because of his experience as mayor and his other background in the military. And so anytime you're the incumbent and you have a challenger coming after you, their way of differentiating themselves is through attacks, right? And that's what we saw in this race. And fortunately, I don't live in CD3, so I wasn't barraged on television with it or in the mailbox. But we do know that that's essentially the strategy when a challenger's coming in. And I think that Congressman Womack kind of took the statesmanly response and just talked about his record and his viewpoints and the issues that matter to people. And he didn't really get in a tit for tat. I think in the grand scheme of things, could you have scored some more points if you'd have done that? Maybe. But if the end is my conscience clear? Did I run the race that I wanted to run? I think that's probably where he achieved. So.
Yeah, and he faces general election opponents, a Democrat and a Libertarian. I still think that's a pretty safe Republican seat up there.
I do think one thing that was particularly telling, Womack really underperformed in Benton County. He barely won Benton County. That's where the bulk of votes are. And I think that's the county where a lot of people have thought that a more kind of mainstream Republicanism is going to kind of thrive. It's a pretty conservative district, especially when you have low turnout.
Well, it's low turnout, but it's the primary, right? And Benton County, in the primary is a different animal, I think, than it is in the general. And I think there's a lot of people that really didn't even know the primaries were going on. We've had to switch from May to March in the presidential years. You have a completely demotivating presidential ticket, both with Democrats and Republicans. And maybe we'll talk about that later. But at the end of the day, there was nothing at the top. And as I talk to candidates, I tried to be nice about it, but I would tell them, you're middle to the bottom of the ballot and no one cares about your race, right? We're trying to talk to people to care about your race.
Do you get paid to do that?
Yes, no one cares, and I'm sorry about it, but they don't unless there's something at the top bringing them out, governor's race, presidential race, and that wasn't there this time, and I think that had a pretty big impact on results.
All right, let's talk about the Supreme Court race. A lot of drama in that race. I think all night long there were some musical chairs between first, second, and third with Baker, Webb, and Womack. Baker, Webb, and Wood. Jay Martin still did respectable, even though he came from out of nowhere and didn't have justice in front of his name. Robert, I'll come to you first on that. Wood and Baker in the runoff, which will be in the general election. Is that how you saw it playing out?
Well, I would say that anytime you have three justices on the ballot together, that's the first thing the voters look for is who's got the experience.
And that's never happened before.
Never happened before, so there was a lot of splitting going on there. You had three women together, so there's definitely some splitting going on there. You had Karen Baker and Jay Martin, who were kind of drawing from generally the same pool of people, more left of center. You have Justice Wood and Justice Webb right of center, pulling from the same group of people, and so you were definitely going to have some splits there. Obviously, it was very close. I would have thought that 2 of the 3 justices would make it. I think it was kind of a grab bag to some degree of which 2 come out of the Scrabble bag. But that's where we ended up. So you kind of got 2 going into the fall.
Jay, you get to explain how Karen Baker, who really didn't spend much money at all, if any, and didn't really get out and campaign a lot, despite Wood and Webb being all over the place, quite frankly, and Jay Martin too, being on television. How did she leads the ticket?
Yeah, barely, but she does lead the ticket. She is the candidate who's been on the ballot the most. I mean, she has a little bit more experience, so people have seen her name the most. But not a lot more. I think it was more moderate and progressive voters who kind of had to make a choice between Martin and Baker, who has been a fairly moderate force on the court. And Baker, Martin had money to invest in Little Rock, and he did well in Pulaski County. He did that media market pretty well, and through some other ways of getting his message out, but he was kind of locked in there. And Baker just has a kind of statewide presence, and she did well in rural counties where nobody went. She was the one who kind of came out on top, usually in very close margins, but enough to hold her up.
Maybe everybody knows someone whose last name is Baker. That could be it too. So.
Yeah, and I do think the rural county, and I've looked at some of the numbers. I haven't dug super deep, but I think the rural places are where she probably had the most success compared to, the higher populations, the Faulkners, the Salines, the Bentons, the Washingtons, the Pulaskis, where, Webb did well in some of those. Wood did well in some of those. That's kind of the difference in a lot of ways.
Yep. All right, let's talk about heading into the fall elections here. We will have that Supreme Court runoff race. It'll be a biggie. The presidential is going to suck all the oxygen out of the air. There will be 4 congressional races. I don't know how competitive they will be. Jay would say they'll be very competitive. Robert will say they won't be very competitive. And we'll have a lot of ballot issues out there, but no big governor's race, no big Senate race. Presidential will be the big driver. How do you see what's going to play out this fall?
Well, I think, what we saw in the primary is, everybody already knew who the nominees were going to be, and that clearly depresses, what is my motivation for going out? I think the general is going to be a little bit different than that. I do think people will go vote if they're used to going to vote some in the general elections, and people are going to feel, the Democrats are definitely going to want to go vote against Donald Trump, and the Trump voters are going to want to go vote against Joe Biden. So I think.
Are you saying that they're not going to be voting for their candidates?
I mean, to some degree, maybe that too. But I mean, I think they'll be somewhat motivated. But at the same time, you also know the outcome in the general. You know that Trump is going to win Arkansas. So, does that play in a little bit? Maybe. I think people don't think about ballot initiatives, but there's some definitely high-profile ones out there. The one dealing with FOIA, the one dealing with abortion. Those could certainly motivate some people in a big way, and that would be interesting to see if they could be the ones driving. You might see a lot smaller drop-off in presidential down ballot where people are actually voting on those.
Yeah, assuming they get their signatures and qualify.
Right. Yeah, that's the big question, but I totally agree. I think this could be an election that's really predominated by ballot measures, both in terms of media spending, but also in terms of where the voters' attention is. I think it actually could be a pretty exciting election on that front because of the nature of a lot of those ballot measures.
I don't think we're going to see what happened in Kansas last year, where more people turned out to vote for that abortion amendment than voted combined in the governor's primaries there. I mean, it was like 100,000 vote over performance. That was unreal. I don't see that happening with the presidential ticket being out there. Do you guys?
No. I mean, people are going to show up to vote, and they know they're going to vote for president as well while they're there. I think it just may be that some of the energy and some of the conversation is going to be around those ballot measures more than being major turnout drivers. Although I do think that a couple of those issues, especially the expansion of medical marijuana, could be a driver if it gets on the ballot. So I think it could be a very interesting fall. I do think the key question is on the more candidate-based races is there a major investment in the Supreme Court race? I think that's a key question.
I think some outside groups will come play in that, so be prepared. So whether that's good or bad
well,
for you.
I think even with getting another justice not being in the race, I think you're down to 2, and people maybe can make a different decision based on where they want to put their dollars to. And anytime, like we said earlier, with Baker and Martin kind of pooling in the same group and Webb and Wood pooling more in the same group, there's people that are saying, I don't know who to support, or I'm afraid to support this one because the other one's going to get mad, and half of that's gone away. So even the candidates themselves, whether outside money comes in or not, the candidates themselves, you would think, would be able to have a little bit more open campaign funds to be able to get their committees to go get.
A lot of people just stayed out of
Right.
giving
Yeah.
in that race.
All right. Well, we'll have a lot to talk about as the election progresses. Thank God we're through primary season, so now we move on to the next. Robert Coon, Jay Barth, thank you both for being here. Appreciate you very much.
Thanks.
All right. We're back with more right after this.